Welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast, where we're addressing the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. Join us each week as we spark a midlife renewal and create a firm foundation for the next wonderful, exciting, awesome season of life.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Midlife podcast. It's great to be here with you. I'm Curtis.
Hi, everybody. It's Karen.
It's great to be here with you too, Karen.
Oh, thanks.
So have we heard from our listeners lately?
We have. Actually, I heard from a couple different listeners, and they had recently listened to the Self-Compassion series, which was the one before our current Surprising Mind series.
Yeah.
And they had some similar comments. They both pretty much said, I'm starting to really appreciate how differently I treat others than I treat myself. And they were kind of like, well, I kind of know I have these patterns, but when I really reflect on it, they become super apparent and the difference becomes stark.
I'm coming to realize that there are people that really, they believe that they don't deserve compassion.
I totally believe that.
Yeah. They don't believe they deserve compassion from themselves. And as you sit there, you might think, well, that's ridiculous because, God made me. I'm God's creature. I have my defects. But of course, like anybody else, we all deserve some compassion. Mm-hmm. But then you start digging down into some specific situations, particular circumstances.
Right.
The time you made a mistake, or you were a little ugly, or more than that. And we start to think we don't deserve compassion. And all of a sudden, we're getting wrapped around our own axle, as it were.
Right. And I think of that actually as, that could be a real obstacle, even in our spiritual lives, because we know from scripture and history that God is extremely compassionate. It's one of the key characteristics of God is merciful and compassionate. And I think sometimes, as you said, we have these deeper unconscious beliefs and decisions that really get in the way of us knowing God in that way and receiving God in that way.
Yeah. So if you have a mental block,
and
it's probably tied up with some emotions,
mm-hmm.
then it can be hard for the spirit to penetrate that area.
Yes.
It's going to be greatly reduced, I think, in effect.
Right. And I think this is actually, Curtis, a large part of why we do what we do is we have come to recognize just the layers of the human person and the way they all work together and the way that the mental and emotional life, and even you could call it the unconscious life, as we've been talking about, is really connected with what's going on in our spiritual life. And there's a lot of research that says it's connected to what's going on in our physical life and in our bodies too.
Yeah. So these beliefs, these mental, patterns that cut us off
mm-hmm.
from healing,
mm-hmm.
that interfere with God's action in our lives, it's very sad. And we're not okay with it. We're going to do something about it.
Yeah. And you know this, Curtis, but I don't think most of my listeners would know. There's a technique that I specifically was trained in around this particular area, which is releasing some of that mental and emotional baggage so that we can live a freer life. We can enter into the spiritual life and receive all the layers of healing that God wants for us.
Yeah, let's talk about this technique.
Okay. So what I'm talking about is just called mental and emotional release. And it's really rooted in some of the characteristics of the unconscious. And we haven't talked about these in our previous episodes, but they're how the unconscious works in terms of thoughts and emotions. And a couple things that the unconscious mind does is it holds all of our memories and all of our emotions. So all of our life store of memories, all of our emotions we've experienced and connected with things from the past, positive and negative, that's where all that resides in the unconscious.
Well, that's right. It's all of that isn't present to my
Yeah.
conscious mind all at once.
Exactly. And some of it I might retrieve really easily, and some of it might be hard to retrieve consciously.
Yeah, it could be hard because it's just way back there, it's buried,
Mm-hmm.
or I might be avoiding it.
Yeah. And if you remember, we talked about how the unconscious works in symbols and images and emotions. So it's not necessarily that we have these play-by-play memories or movie memories of our life, but we have some kind of representation of events, of people, of circumstances, and it all gets contained in the unconscious.
Right.
And one interesting thing is we sort of connect things and associate things in our unconscious that our conscious considers to be alike. And so here's an example. Let's say I'm very small, I'm, 2 years old or less, and I have this experience of frustration. But I'm having the emotion, but I don't maybe know what it is. And then later on, I have the same emotion and I connect it with that experience. It gets associated with my previous experience. And then, of course, I'm a human being. I'm going to have a number of experiences of frustration. And at some point, somebody labels that for me. Are you upset? Are you angry? Are you frustrated? Whatever the label is. And then I have a word for that emotion. And then every time I experience that emotion, it gets associated together because that's how my unconscious learns. It groups like things together. What happens is it creates this association, this long association of all these experiences of frustration. And depending on how that's working for me, when I feel frustrated in my current moment, I'm actually linking that and accessing all my experiences of frustration. This is why I can respond inappropriately sometimes in the present. Like, well, why did I get so angry at that thing? I don't know why that was
sure.
how angry I was. Well, it's because actually I'm not just experiencing that thing. I'm tapping into all these previous experiences of anger.
That really resonates. Occasionally, something will happen that just sets me off.
Right.
And it can bring out, oh boy, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was in a situation once with someone and they were interpreting our interaction in a certain way. And I was really confused. Didn't make sense to me. I was like, well, that's not really what I meant. Or I was trying to sort through it. And finally, the person made a comment about, this is just like XYZ experience. And all of a sudden I realized, okay, they're not really responding to our interaction.
Yeah.
They're responding to this whole other experience, which I could tell was extremely emotionally significant to that person.
Yeah, I bet our listeners can think of a time when something happened or something was said to them, and all of a sudden it just set them off.
Right.
And they just realized, well, this is totally disproportionate.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's where our mental maps are kicking in to try to make meaning of what's happening. And it's interpreting that interaction in a certain way.
I'm also thinking of certain exercises I've done where there's a word or like love or high concept words. And then the group of, 10 of us were invited to write down 5 different words we associate with that.
Right.
And it's really shocking how few of the words are held in common.
Yeah. Everybody has a different list.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. Because the meaning of that word is different for everybody. And it's based on their own personal history and story and journey and experiences.
And these associations.
Yeah. So all of our interpretations, attitudes, emotions, memories are held there in the unconscious. And if we don't release some of the negative experiences, the negative decisions and beliefs, the negative emotions, they're going to keep influencing us in the present moment.
Well, as you know, Karen, I'm working on forgiveness, and
Right.
I've just recognized that I've got a certain amount of rumination, and it just comes up sometimes.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's not serving me. It's coloring at least sometimes and experiences of my life. It's not helping me.
Right. Right.
And so I'm trying to release that. And
Hmm.
actually, I'm on your list to do this.
Oh, to do the mental
Yeah,
emotional release.
yeah.
Yes, you are.
But I don't know if I have to get out my credit card. Get on your list.
You might qualify, honey. You might qualify.
But it takes a certain amount of time and has to be scheduled.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is an example of actually, there's a few ways for me to get at this. I'm doing the prayers.
Right.
I'm doing the strategies.
Hmm.
And here's another way for me to get at this.
Yes. Yeah. This is something that it just integrates very nicely with other forms of healing that we're seeking. But the thing about it is it taps into how your unconscious is already processing things. And there's a technique by which we can sort of bring up and start to access, well, what are the negative emotions primarily that I'm hanging on to? What are the specific beliefs and what we could call unconscious commitments that I've made that are affecting me?
So a premise of mental emotional release is that you might be consciously aware of some baggage, like, I'm just working off some baggage.
Right.
Or you have baggage that you're not fully aware of.
Correct. So I find that as we do sort of the technique for pulling up all of this baggage, as you say, which is a good word for it, there's stuff that people aren't surprised by.
Yeah.
And then there's usually some stuff that they've actually never verbalized before.
Yeah. So baggage really runs the full continuum from, oh, that's annoying, to, I'm carrying this, to, ooh, this is a heavy burden, and further up the scale.
Yes.
So baggage, that's what we're talking about. So how do you know? How do you know if you're carrying some baggage?
That is a great question. Okay. There's two things that can happen to you, that mean you have baggage.
Okay. Two things.
Okay.
Hit
Ready?
me.
Okay. Number one, you're born. Number two, you grow up. If either of those things has happened to you, you have baggage. And this is just a fact of being a human being, okay? We're not in the Garden of Eden. We're not in the fulfillment of the kingdom. Therefore, we have baggage. And I think we can get a little defensive about it. And part of that is, right, we don't want to admit, but part of it is it's just kind of painful. We don't want to go and drag it all up because it seems like really an onerous emotional task.
Often it can seem pointless.
Yes. And the thing that I love about mental emotional release is, yes, we do some exercises to identify the primary negative emotions and articulate the beliefs, but it's not just to drag it up. It's because once you do that, then you can let it go.
Well, I think one of the advantages of this technique is you're not really dragging it up. Well, but you're making it service. Can you explain this part?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times when we have either, beliefs or emotions or events that are difficult, part of what's so difficult about revisiting them is we get really associated. We just get in the thing, and the emotions are strong and the experience is strong. And you don't actually have to do that to release all of that emotion. And your unconscious actually can do that from a different place. It can look at the event from a different perspective and release it from there without reliving the whole thing.
So this is maybe a hard question because of confidentiality. Can you give us some examples?
Well, why don't I just sort of compile a little example here for you? I'll just kind of make one up.
Okay.
So let's say a person has a difficult relationship with their dad.
Sure.
Let's say maybe they were pretty authoritarian and had like to have control and control the family. So they might have a lot of emotions from that relationship and from events in the relationship, like anger can come forward, frustration. I've heard, even hatred. I heard one person say, I hate my dad. And that was important for that person to say, to name that negative emotion. And then there might be, just from a number of experiences, a set of beliefs or decisions that person made. Like, for example, maybe they saw their mom in relationship to their dad and they said to themselves, my mom's a victim. And maybe they made a decision. I'm never going to be like my mom.
Never going to be like my mom. Okay.
Right. And maybe they ended up with some unconscious beliefs like men are controlling. I can't work with men.
Yeah.
I have to watch out for men. They don't want me to be myself and make my own decisions. So those would be a set of things that that person would need to release in order to move forward without those limiting them.
So how much of that list would be, consciously in the top of mind going into a session like this?
Well, it depends on the person and the work that they've already done. In the process, usually it's just the way that the process works. It's really speaking to your unconscious. So it's going to bring up some things that perhaps your unconscious hasn't presented to you yet. And that's actually a feature of the unconscious mind. It's going to present things to you from its memories and emotional bucket when it thinks you're ready to resolve them.
Well, that seems very on point, because I've definitely experienced you're cruising along and then this past stuff starts to crop up, and it's almost like, you got to be feeling good enough about yourself or about your situation to want to take on some of this baggage.
Yeah, or you're in the midst of some kind of a process and it seems appropriate and reasonable for that to be presented. I think we've all had that experience, right? All of a sudden, I had this memory and I kind of forgotten about it, and I think I need a little healing there, but the time was right and you were ready. So your unconscious presented it to you.
Karen, sometimes the baggage just shows up.
Yeah.
It's like the cat that brings you the mouse. Here, Mom, look at my mouse. Isn't that great?
Why are you interpreting it as a mouse? And why are you saying that's bad?
So sometimes it shows up, but also we can recognize it sometimes. So let's talk about some ways we might recognize it.
Sure. Let's see. So, we mentioned one, right, which is when I'm having a response to an event that doesn't seem to be quite in line with the actual situation. That can be a sign that there's something there.
Right, when it's disproportionate. And another way is when we think about a certain memory and there's really strong emotion associated with it.
Yeah, especially if it's negative emotion.
Yeah.
If there's a strong positive emotion, you're like, hey, man, we want that.
Yeah.
I want that in my
embrace it.
unconscious. That's good. A lot of times if there's a memory and there's just this wave of emotion around it, that means there's something to be released. If you've really released the negative emotion, then you can think about the memory, but not have that visceral associated emotional experience.
And another way to detect your baggage is listen to your inner dialogue. This is something we're working on in the self-compassion course. What's that dialogue? What's happening? How do you talk to yourself? And I think this is a good indicator. It can tell you a lot.
Sure. What you're saying to yourself, because a lot of that is in the unconscious, and it's just going to run that dialogue for you until you evaluate it and decide to make a change.
Here's one that I really like. If you're asking yourself the question, Why does this always happen to me?
Oh, yes.
And
It's so hard. Yes.
why does this always happen to me?
It can show up in relationships, can show up in your family, in your work life, kind of your job history. If you start to notice patterns, yes, and you're asking yourself that question, it's really great to follow up with, okay, what's my pattern here?
Yeah.
What's my pattern here? It doesn't mean that you are responsible for all those situations, but there's probably some kind of pattern going on.
Throughout this season, we've talked about the unconscious mind and breaking behaviors down. What can seem like a simple behavior has many little steps and pieces, and the roles of habits. So those are some good tools to, if you can really break down the sequence for any of these things,
Right.
then you can start to think about, well, what can I do? How could I change the pattern? How can I flip the script?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And there's some things that might be true for you that would make you more likely to seek more help, however you choose to seek that help. So I like to say that there's some great reasons to do mental emotional release, and they're pretty individual. But for example, if you've got that unresolved emotion that just drives you, for example, if you're like, I just have this overwhelming foundational guilt, it's just there throughout everything. That's a reason, because that's a negative emotion to release. And that can be sadness, fear, hurt, anger, and you just can't let go of it. It could be, like you said, Curtis, the rumination issue. If that's a really big difficulty, ruminating on past events, and you just want to let go.
Yeah,
That's
after a
another
certain
reason.
point, you realize turning this thing over and over and over, I'm not really solving the problem here.
Right. It's not serving you. It's not serving you. If you have that triggering situation where you're responding in an inappropriate way to situations, if you feel really burdened by life events, like everything is weighing on you and it's hard to let that go. Some people just get stuck. Like, I'm just stuck in my life and I can't move on until I've addressed some of these things.
So Karen, you received MER.
Oh, sure.
What was that like? What can you share with us?
Sure. Well, it can be very targeted. So I had a specific targeted area of life that I was wanting to dig into. And some of it was, as I said before, unsurprising to me. But I digged up a very foundational limiting belief. And it was surprising because most people who know me would never think I have that belief. And I never had verbalized it before.
Can you share what that was?
I don't mind sharing it. It was the belief that I am powerless. I am powerless.
You don't look powerless to me, honey.
Well, in some ways, I'm not powerless, but in some very nuanced ways, it would show up in situations. And since I've identified and verbalized that, I've started to notice all the different ways that it shows up and keeps me from engaging in certain ways. And so I've had to really release that. There's an initial release and then there's an ongoing release because you start to see it everywhere.
An ongoing release.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, how does the mental emotional release technique work?
Well, just very practically, there's an extensive personal history really targeted to the language of the unconscious to allow that to come forth. And sometimes that's a little emotional for people because they're pulling all of that up. And that's the first half. But the second half, you just go through and you allow and invite your unconscious to let go and release the negative emotions, the unconscious decisions, the limiting beliefs.
So working with the unconscious, that can sound kind of creepy, especially as Catholics, right? We don't
Yeah.
we do not release our conscious control.
Mm-hmm.
That is not okay.
Yeah.
So what about that? I mean, how is it you're working with the unconscious without,
Oh, sure. Without being hypnotized or something.
Without skipping the conscious.
Right. Well, the unconscious has a language. It has a style of communication that it listens to and responds to. So you're using the language of the unconscious, but you're doing it consciously. You're getting buy-in from your whole self, and then you're using the techniques the unconscious mind already uses in your memories and your emotions to let go of things.
Okay, so it's the whole person. It's like, oh, yeah, I like this. Yeah, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is working.
Yeah.
Or no, that's not really it.
Yeah.
Let's shift over here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that makes sense to me. Karen, is it okay if I read some quick testimonials from clients of yours?
Yeah.
Okay. Before my breakthrough session, that's the MER. Before my breakthrough session, I described my stress level as a 9 out of 10 due to the severity of my medical situation. After meeting with Karen, my stress level was 2. I'm feeling grounded and I've released my anxiety. And I think that was about being able to move forward, right?
Yeah, that was being stuck in a very challenging situation.
Yeah, so being anxious is one thing and being stuck makes it much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, she added, thank you, Karen. I'm so grateful. Here's another testimonial. I've tried so many different avenues, and this is the single most helpful thing I've ever done.
That was a beautiful experience. And it really speaks to, we're all trying so many different things to receive wholeness, to be healed, to progress as ourselves, to grow. And there's so many different avenues. And what I think about the MER is that it integrates on so many different levels with the spiritual avenues, the physical avenues that people are pursuing. And it addresses the mental and emotional reality.
Integrates on many levels.
Yeah.
That sounds like the embodied person.
It does. Good point.
So Karen, if somebody wants to know more, if they want to explore working with you, what should they do?
Sure. Just the very easiest and best way is to go to our website, thecatholicmidlife.com. There's a big orange button that says book a consult. You can book a consult. I'd be happy to share more with anybody.
So do I have to book a consult with you, honey?
You do if you want to get on my schedule.
I want to get on your calendar.
Okay.
Okay, awesome.
Book a consult.
Well, great. It's great to be here with you guys. And what can I say? It's great. So we will see you next week. Take care. God
Bye-bye.
bless. Thank you so much for listening to the Catholic Midlife podcast. It's great to be here with you. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite app or platform. Leave a review. That's so helpful so that others like you can find the podcast. And be sure to tell your friends. We'll see you next week.